Hello, welcome back to the Business of Happiness podcast. Hi, guys. I'm Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a great day because we are acknowledging the fact that dentistry can be lonely. Dentistry can be lonely, and often it feels like no one understands. Have you ever had that experience where you walk out of a conference or a study club meeting and you feel just so disconnected from the other dentists in the room? You feel like, I'm just not like them. They look like they got everything down. They know what they're doing. They're celebrating their second homes and their cars, their fancy cars and their boats. And they seem so happy they got their whole team together. They've had this team for 30 years. And I'm really struggling over here. I'm not enjoying this ride. Or maybe there's something that's come up for you where you're feeling shameful about it in dentistry, like the case just didn't go that well, or there was a board complaint against you. And it feels very isolating and lonely to have that experience when you're supposed to be in a group of people who know what your life is like. Because we've all had the experience of walking away from Thanksgiving or some other family get-together and no one gets it. No one really gets the entrepreneurial journey, the taking care of others journey, the leading a team journey, the what it's like to be a woman in dentistry journey. And if you're anything like me, maybe you've even felt like you've had to wear different personas in different situations. Morph yourself to the environment you're in, and it's exhausting. This idea of faking it constantly. I mean, we do it all day long for our patients. That idea or that feeling of being on stage all day long and constantly feeling like you need to be professional. But to continue doing it into the night, at a CE event, it's so exhausting. And then to do it again for your family. And have you ever felt like you really don't know where you are? You've been faking it and pretending to be someone in so many different environments, being a chameleon, trying to pretend that you're a part of whatever you're walking into, that you don't even know where you land. Dentistry can be lonely, can be very isolating. And if you're hearing this right now, know that you are not alone. So today we're going to talk about some of the reasons why it feels so isolating, and then talk about some ideas, a few suggestions and tips of what you can do to feel more connected and more seen, and to identify who you really are in the mix. It makes so much sense that you feel this way because as a woman in dentistry, nowadays we're seeing more women. The number of students in dental school classes are 50-50 or even slightly higher in terms of the number of women in their classes. And if you've been in dentistry for a couple decades, it wasn't that way for you. I mean, I know I was one of 2 women in my residency. There are very few women in dentistry as a whole. It's changing, it's shifting. But it didn't always used to be that way. And this paradigm of masculine energy and being very masculine has perpetuated. And so we end up feeling alone because we have a hard time connecting to other women. I've heard so many women say to me, I'm easier friends with men. And although we can create those relationships, it's not exactly the same. Right? And even in our practices, we can feel isolated, even though our practices are predominantly women, even though our teams are predominantly women. It's a very different relationship when you're the doctor to assistants and hygienists and front desk staff. It's a very different relationship. So it feels isolating. It also can feel isolating when you're paying the bills. It's not easy to become friends with one of your teammates when you're writing the payroll checks, when you're creating the decisions of whether or not to give bonuses at the end of the year. That kind of crosses the line with friendships. And those friendships feel uncomfortable to complain in. You can't go to your hygienist and complain about how hard things are or the frustration around money. Money is a big stressor in our world. We carry a ton of debt. We pay very big bills. We manage so much in the practice in terms of keeping it fiscally alive, keeping it satiable, keeping it sustainable. And often we take on a lot of that stress as our own. We shoulder a lot of it. And to not have a friend or a colleague who you can talk to about that can feel very isolating. It can feel very isolating even though you're seeing hundreds of new faces and patients every week. I always thought that was so ironic. We get to interact with so many people on a daily basis and create these new acquaintances, but it's tricky. Many of us feel uncomfortable reaching out a friendship with our patient population. I know many women who have done it very successfully, but many of us feel like that crosses a professionalism line, in terms of doctor-patient relationship. And I get it. I've been in that situation when I'm at, the kids' basketball game or some sporting event, and half the adults in the room have paid me to help straighten their kids' teeth. It's not a very comfortable situation to then say, hey, let's split the bill at lunch, right? Or come over to my house. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, did they think their kids' ortho treatment paid for this lamp? I don't know. It feels uncomfortable to create a relationship and a friendship. So even though we see hundreds of patients a week, we can feel very isolated and lonely. And many, many dentists practice in solo practices. And even if you're not in a solo practice, maybe there's a level of competition within your group, or maybe you're just not feeling aligned in terms of personal values with the other person in your group. And that feels isolating. I remember feeling that way for sure in many situations. I'm thinking now about even groups that I wanted to create closer relationships with. I joined a cleft lip and palate team here in Maine. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is great because everybody coming to cleft lip and palate team will definitely be vested in certain values that are a little bit different from other groups that we're connected in. And we each have our own specialty. And I walked away from those groups also feeling isolated and lonely. It's really interesting that even when we're in situations surrounded by people, we can have that feeling. And this really is an epidemic happening in our profession of loneliness. And we know that loneliness contributes to so many health risks, not just mental and emotional unhappiness, depression, but we start isolating ourselves. We stop taking care of our bodies as much. And when we don't have that interaction and shared experience with someone else, we start self-shaming and self-judging to a point that really begins to feel uncomfortable. And that can lead to further bouts of depression. And now we're talking about psychosomatic problems in our body that we stimulate from not taking care of our mental and emotional health. Just recently we celebrated Thanksgiving, and it can be complicated in family situations as well, especially when you're earning more than most of your siblings and yet feeling like you don't have that freedom of wealth or availability of money. And that's difficult for people to understand. Equating having a high salary with the burdens that dentistry has. I'll never forget so many Christmases we would host at our house most frequently. Number one reason why, because either Killian or I were on call. We didn't have the next day off. And often, in the middle of lunch, in the middle of dinner, one of us would have to go and see an emergency patient. And I remember the judgment that came from certain family members, either that we didn't take family seriously and we didn't plan accordingly. They don't understand always the need for call, or the judgment of, oh, you work too hard. And that can feel isolating as well. Nobody quite understands, especially in family situations, and especially when we don't have a lot of other dentists in the family. So feeling alone in that situation can also be completely understandable. So let's just pause here for a moment. Isn't it ironic that so many dentists, so many women in dentistry are feeling this way, and we don't talk about it? And how ironic is it that we feel so alone and yet we all share the same feeling? I feel so alone, so unseen. Right now, let me just acknowledge you for feeling this way, and let me just give you a big, warm virtual hug and remind you that you are not alone. This is so common. It is so common to feel this way. And I'm going to offer to you today a few suggestions on how you can support yourself when you're feeling lonely. Number one is acknowledge it. Just acknowledge it. Allow for it. It's like that old Chris Voss, the FBI negotiator. He says, just label it for what it is. I feel lonely. And the moment we allow ourselves to recognize it, it takes a little bit of the sting out of it, and it allows you to emotionally process it. I feel lonely today. Give yourself permission to cry. Give yourself permission to feel that way. I feel lonely, and no, don't judge it. I think so often we judge ourselves and we tell ourselves, I shouldn't feel this way. I'm surrounded by people. I shouldn't feel this way. Look at how much money I'm making. I shouldn't feel this way. I've got everything I need. We start putting all these caveats or reasons why we shouldn't feel the way we feel. And I think that's one of the biggest problems in dentistry is we judge our feelings or we push them down. We pretend they don't exist. So let it be. Accept. Acknowledge and accept. I feel lonely. Remember, we cannot change what we're not aware of. It's the awareness that is the magic. And then you get to ask yourself, well, what do I need? And whatever you need could be very different from what I need. So maybe it's personal connection. I need some personal connection. Amazing. Just recognizing that is a big deal. I mean, your answer might be, I need rest. Amazing too, right? In fact, that's 99.9% of the time, that's the answer. I need a nap, or I just need rest, or I need to cry about this. And when we allow ourselves just to process, we feel better. Haven't you always felt good after a good cry? Let yourself, allow yourself. And by the way, if bringing up that emotion is difficult, a suggestion I have is put on some beautiful sad music. When you know you need to feel sadness and process it, music for me really helps. And put out a box of tissues and give yourself permission to cry. And if the tears don't come, don't judge it. Just acknowledging it really, really is the first step. And then asking yourself, what do I need? So if your answer to that question was, I need some connection, then what I'm going to invite you to consider is allowing yourself to be a little vulnerable. We've all heard the saying, fake it till you make it. And I absolutely despise that saying. I'm going to debunk that right here, right now, because there are ways of showing up even when you're afraid that you don't have to fake it. In fact, what if we refuse to ever fake anything ever again? That feeling that you have right now of not even knowing who you are, that feeling like you've been chameleoning and morphing yourself for everyone for so long that you don't even know who you are, that's the faking it problem. That's what happens when we fake it till we make it. We peacock ourselves. We try to pretend we're somebody who we're not. And right there doesn't allow us to recognize who we truly are. It puts a little shadow over who you uniquely are, and we can't know who we are if we're constantly pretending to be someone else or morphing to be like someone else. So let's stop faking it. So where do we find safety for vulnerability? Well, it's not going to be with your patient in the chair. Your patient in the chair, their health, their healing, your ability to do your best work for them requires you a certain level of confidence to show up in that space. So yes, there's a professionalism we hold during the day. But where are you giving yourself permission and safety to be vulnerable? And maybe it's not with your team. That's okay too. You are not your team members' friends. You are the boss. You are the leader. It is a very different relationship, but acknowledging that you need that is so important. And so making the time and space to find those relationships and friendships is critical. And maybe you can find them in your study club. But here's the suggestion I'm going to make to you. When you do find a group or even a single person who you think that you can be vulnerable with, allow for it. Let them know how you feel. Put down the faking it need. And Then notice how they make you feel. Remember, I always say when you feel good, you can do good. This is a critical moment where feel good, do good comes in. If your friendships are making you feel worse, then that right there is not a supportive connection. And this happened to me a lot in dentistry. I would find a group of women. We'd get together, we'd feel excited to be vulnerable. Suddenly everyone would be vulnerable. So the safety of vulnerability was created, but then we just pulled each other further down. What I found was we would get together and just complain, and no one would ever have a solution. Everyone would just feel worse and worse about themselves. Do you know what I mean? Have you ever been in that situation where maybe you show up and you had a rough day with your office manager and you bring to the group and you're like, oh my gosh, it's just this communication with my office manager. Something feels like it's off and we can never communicate properly. There's always something lost. And then someone in the group says, oh my gosh, my office manager's the worst. And someone else says, no, wait a minute, mine's the worst. And now we're all just talking about bashing office managers. Have you ever been in that situation? And we all walk away feeling less connected to our office managers and worse because there's no resolve or resolution or support. Another very common thing that happens in dentistry, especially when we first learn to start sharing. And I was going to say supporting, but that is not supportive. That is pulling each other down. That is commiserating. So giving yourself permission to assess your relationships. Is this a connection that's lifting me up? Can I be both vulnerable and share how I feel? And do I walk away from the conversation feeling better, like I have support, like somebody has maybe a perspective shift or a solution or a suggestion? Or am I just feeling worse about myself? And then allow yourself to keep looking. It's not a one and done. Just because you have a group of friends doesn't mean that this group of friends is supportive for you in this season of your life. Let it be okay that we ebb and flow in relationships and find the relationships that lift us up and meet us where we are. Let's also just acknowledge that there are so many spaces. We're so lucky right now with technology, with advancements in technology. We can reach out so much further than our physical location. There are so many groups online. There are so many opportunities. And just because you don't align with one, don't stop looking. There are some big groups out there. I know I could start mentioning them all, but I felt isolated in some of them. On some of the Facebook groups where I get in, I'm like, this is not my jam. This doesn't feel good to me. Let that be okay, but don't stop looking, especially if you're feeling lonely. I'll let you know as well that Radical Happiness, it's a program that I run and it offers both. And maybe it's the group for you. Our next cohort begins January 24th, 2025. And it is both. It is community of like-minded women in dentistry and support. It is the how-to. From a science perspective, from a research, evidence-based perspective, from psychology, neurolinguistic programming, subconscious reprogramming, and somatic nervous system regulation work. It is support and education on how to feel better and connect with women. Community is the medicine always. So just imagine this. Imagine a world where you really can have it all, where you get to love this career that you've poured your heart into. You've poured millions of dollars into. You have poured so much time and dedication and sacrificed so much of your life for. Imagine that you can still have that and feel like you know who you are. Like you can show up to study clubs and Thanksgiving and your patient care and meetings, knowing who you are and being integrous to who you are. Imagine you also can have a community of women where you can be vulnerable and share how you're feeling. And let it be okay to not be okay, to have days that you feel shitty about, to have things happen in your life that bring you down, and to know that that group of women will support you and lift you up, will hold space for you to cry tears, but also support you in feeling better about yourself, not worse. Let me tell you, it's possible. I know because I'm living proof of it. And radical happiness is exactly what we do. And this is why I created this incredible program, because that's what was missing in my life. That's what was so painful to me. It was almost difficult to describe to someone. It was impossible to describe to someone that when I looked in the mirror, I didn't even know the person that I saw. But when I found that community of women who could see me and know me, that is when the healing began. You deserve it. So if you're interested in radical happiness, I'm going to leave a link in the show notes, not just for the landing page, but also to connect with me to ask your own questions to see if this is the next right step for you. And if you're feeling lonely in dentistry, know that you are not alone. Have a fabulous rest of the week, my friends. And remember, when you feel good, giving yourself permission to start taking action steps towards feeling good, that's when you start doing good. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Business of Happiness podcast. If this episode brought you new perspective and value, I invite you to subscribe so that you catch all upcoming episodes and leave us a review. And if you know of a friend or colleague who could benefit from this perspective, share this episode with them and empower their day. For more information about the Business of Happiness and the Radical Happiness for Practitioners course, find me on www.thebizofhappiness.com. See you there.